Namaste, Swagatam. Sri Mahalingam Balaji's new book, Caste-icide, was recently launched as an eBook, while the print version and a Hindi translation are due in September 2025, this year. The book is focused on debunking the current false and misleading propaganda about caste system and argues that it is primarily a Western colonial construct. About Sri Mahalingam Balaji, Sri Mahalingam ji, whose pen name is Asi, hails from a lineage of Vedic scholars and Agnihotris who moved to secular occupations one generation ago. He has had a successful career in the corporate sector for nearly 3 decades, having held many leadership positions in India and abroad. As a corporate leader and research director, he is well known for his thought leadership and extensive experiences in setting up global research and analytics teams and mentoring research teams at scale. Currently, he is incubating a think tank to articulate the Bharatiya civilizational worldview in a contemporary context and develop institutional mechanisms to aid research on Bharatiya Parampara. Vanakkam Mahalingam ji, thank you for coming
Shri Gurubhyo
today on
Namaha.
this platform
Namaste ji.
and talking
Namaste
to
ji.
us about the
Suprabhatam
book.
Kavita ji.
Namaste. Mahalingam ji, you wrote a Brahmin genocide almost a year ago, and we reviewed it at Brhat. And then you filed a public interest litigation in the Tamil Nadu courts against the obsolete Aryan invasion theory, AIT, that is being taught in schools. And now this book, Caste-icide. You've been very busy. Can you briefly take us through a journey of why you wrote these books and why you take up such causes and how all these are interlinked or interrelated? Please.
Namaste Kavita ji. So after the Brahmin genocide book came about, by the way, are you able to hear me clearly? Is that
Yes.
okay? Great. Thank you. So after the Brahmin genocide book was published, many parents in Bharat reached out saying that the colonial era Aryan invasion theory is still being taught in school textbooks because that was one of the chapters in the Brahmin genocide book anyway. And this is such a divisive, has a potential to be very divisive. And why would that theory be taught in the schools? Right? So that is when the thought came about challenging this theory in the Honorable Madras High Court. Right? While all this was happening, many parents also reached out, especially parents from foreign countries and also their youngsters, saying that the younger generation is not very enthusiastic about dharma, and they do have a lot of not too positive opinion, if I may put it, about aspects like often they talk about caste system, they talk about hierarchy, discrimination. So these fake narratives somehow seem to be kind of imbibing some of them and developing what we could sort of call as Hindu self-hate, something like that, identity hate. Right? So, some of these youngsters, I was speaking to them and then providing whatever clarifications I could. And then, while it was all happening, like many youngsters of today, they would like to have a lot of facts and evidences and primary sources, right? They don't just get convinced and they are quite upfront about it. Some of them say, I know you're doing this, but Guruji, we cannot just take what you are saying and then take it at face value. Show me the evidence, right? So that is how it was. And some of the parents were then seeing all this going on. They said, why don't you document this into your book form? Right. So more parents and more youngsters are able to benefit from this. They are able to read it and then form their own opinion about it. And the one thing which they wanted and which you will find in the book is a lot of primary evidences being quoted, right? Because the parents wanted it. They said that we also want to take up this cause of uh, talking about this caste system fake narrative. When we want to challenge it, we want to have primary sources quoted, and we need a kind of a book which kind of challenges the so-called discrimination, caste hierarchy. Then it talks about all the non-egalitarian, all these kind of myths need to be broken. So we need that evidence. So that's how the Caste-icide book came about.
Wonderful. Thank you. And you're responding to a need in society. In terms of PIL that you filed?
The PIL was viewed at the Honorable Madras High Court, and the High Court looked at the evidences which has been cited by me, and the Honorable judges said that, well, you have presented a lot of evidences. At the same time, the textbooks are also made by expert committees. So why don't you? The court is not the best person to decide whether the two-race theory or the invasion theory is valid or not valid. We are not the experts, but why don't we give you an opportunity, a personal hearing opportunity with the textbook committee of NCRT and also with the State Textbook Commission. So NCRT and the State Textbook Commission were kind enough to give me those personal hearings where I submitted a lot of these evidences and facts. And for the benefit of our viewers here, all this has been put out in a website called AryanRaceTheoryDebunked.org. So all these evidences have been uploaded because we like to be transparent with whatever we are doing, so the everybody in Bharat is able to view what we are doing. So after these hearings happened, the NCRT had agreed that they have taken out the Aryan invasion and the race theory part from their textbooks. It is no longer there. Right? So with NCRT, I still have one particular issue which is slightly outside the topic, which is about some references to Purusha Sukta. So that is being taken up separately. As far the Tamil Nadu textbooks is concerned, they were kind enough to evaluate all the evidences. They came back with a feedback that Aryan race is a colonial, it's a Western concept. So there is no such thing like Aryan race. And they also said there is no such thing like an invasion. They're talking about, when they say Aryan is more of a linguistic concept. So that is what their view was. And they have cited some references. I do have some questions around those evidences which were cited. So I have written to them and I'm waiting for their feedback. But in a way, I think 5 out of the 6 books which I quoted have been taken out. Right, they are no longer in obsoleted. They have been obsoleted. They have said that they are not including those portions into that. Only the 6th book is where I still have some work to do. Oh, Ishwara Kripa, that will get done.
Which is this book?
It's one of the books of the Tamil Nadu textbooks where I do have particular portions which I have a challenge with. But the experts are saying that is they have a different view, so I have put out my view, right? But then it's up to them to decide. We will see how it goes.
So you're fighting the good fight. Thank you so much. So the website is called Aryan Race Theory Debunked, one word.org, and we'll put it in the description also for the viewers.
Thank you.
So, which was more out of the 2 books that you wrote, Brahmin Genocide and Caste-icide, which was a harder book in terms of marketing and publicizing? Because you say that Brahmin Genocide, in terms of the previous book, Brahmin Genocide would lead to Hindu genocide. Were there many takers for this theory? Because people don't really read nowadays. They will just look at the name and say, oh, this is about Brahmin genocide. It is about a particular jati. And what is he talking about? They may read the blurb. And now you're talking about caste-icide and you talk about caste. You're picking up very, very hot flashpoint kind of, subjects. So was it very difficult to market either book? And if there were many takers, if not, or if so, can you please explain how it was, both of them were received?
Thank you, Ji. Many of the Sanatana Dharmics were able to kind of appreciate where we are coming from when we the key issues, especially on the when we say there is a Brahmin genocide is a precursor to the Hindu extinction, right? So that was our earlier book about, and they were able to accept our fact and evidence based arguments. So that was what happened in the first book. And we also understand that when we say there is a Brahmin genocide, it is not referring to a particular caste, and there is a history behind it where the colonial rulers perceived that Brahmins were the custodians of knowledge systems, and then it was an attack on our knowledge systems. And they also understand that the tools and the templates which are used for attacking the Brahmins community, targeting them or giving them the hate speech, all that can be easily used by to another community or to another person by simply terming them as Brahminical. So I do give that example often when we speak to some person says, is this exclusive to the Brahmin community? I say, what if somebody calls you Brahminical?
Yes.
How do you answer that, right? How do you prove you are not? Because somehow the onus becomes on you that you have to prove that the person or the community is not Brahminical. And is there even a standard definition of this word called Brahminical? Right? So it becomes very difficult. And once it's called as Brahminical, then all the tools and templates which were used to attack Brahmins can be used to seamlessly. They become useful to attack another person or another community. So it's a problem not just for one community, but it is a problem for the entire Bharatiya society. So they understand that. And in terms of the second book, G, it is just been launched, so I don't have much data points about to say that how it is getting received. But all we can say is that this came out of the interactions with the parents and the younger generations of many Bharatiyas, and it came to fulfill a particular need. They said that they need a book to address the Hindu self-hate, which primarily originates from narratives of hierarchy, caste system, non-egalitarian and discriminatory. All these had to be addressed, and hence this book came about.
So, would
Did I
it be
answer?
right to assume that this dubious theories, such as the Aryan invasion theory, etc., they lead to divisiveness between various jatis, Brahmanas and other jatis? So, this has led to a lot of atrocity literature, or has stemmed from a lot of atrocity literature on the caste system and caste theory. So, the connection, and you make this assumption in both the books. Can you please make that connection and explain the chronology for new viewers or others who may not understand what is the connection, why AIT or Aryan invasion theory will cause divisiveness between jatis, or the Aryan Dravidian divide and the Brahmin genocide, and the caste system, caste theory. There's a huge amount of atrocity literature surrounding this. So just to make connect those dots for viewers who may be new or who may not understand the how it links each other.
Great. That's a that's an interesting question, G. It is not our argument, at least not my argument, that when the colonials boarded the ship to come to India, they came up with some kind of a master plan and then they went about executing it. That is not the argument at all. But what we know from our research is that they have a very, I think they had rather a very broad framework which said that there was barbarism, primitive, and a false religion, fake religion led by fake priests, false priests, they call it.
Heathens, pagans, all that. Yeah.
Yes. So this was a rough framework they had, and they talked about the idol Brahmin, right? So that narrative was pretty much there. They talked about caste, some kind of an hierarchy. They talked about different races. All this was I'm talking about is the mid to late 1700s itself, right? So they had
Mid to
pretty
late
much
1700s.
mid to late 1700s, right? So I have quoted, I think, one reference from a Dutch periodical, I think, in the Brahmin genocide book as well, right? Now, once this was there, they came in, and then it became they had, I think, initially some Orientalists who viewed it differently. Then after James Mill came about and his book came about, pretty much they had one view that everything is about Hinduism is primitive, barbaric, and they had to fit in all the narratives. Like Aryan theory came, they had to fit it into a narrative where it says these are primitive, barbaric practices, and they have a civilizing vision. They have to justify their presence in India. So that was the broader template they used. So it evolved, and I think in the book. If I'm not wrong, in the ninth chapter, I have spoken about how the discourse was changing as well. Right? And now, coming back, how does this all fit in? The Aryan theory is very important because the Aryan theory brings up that there are two different races. And that why is it important? Because this is what is called as there is a reason for people to other another person, right? So there has to be a logical reason to bring in what we call as oppressor oppressed narrative, and to
The
do that
divide. Yeah.
they have to sorry.
The divide between,
The
they
divide,
want to
yes,
create
absolutely
divisions, fault lines, in
correct.
a society. Yeah.
Correct. So they had to create an identity based division. They had to say that. So what they said was the first three Varnas, which is the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, and the Vaisyas, came from. They are the Aryans. They were the invaders. They oppressed the indigenous people, and they That is how the Shudra Varna came about. And so this was a racial difference. But now that the race is taken out of the question, so now that there is an acceptance that there is no race after our court case at the honorable courts, now it brings open a few questions, because any youngster or anybody who is even watching, all our viewers in Brhat who are watching this may come up with the logical questions, right? Why three varnas have to fight against the Shudra varna? Why can't Shudras and Vaisyas have joined hands together? Because then that brings in the economic might, that brings in the numerically superior might, and Shudras were also kings in many places. So why couldn't
Yes.
it be that way? Or if there is a rule that three have to join hand together, why can't the other three join hands? And then the Brahmins had no economic power, they had no military power. They then why would it's much easier to oppress them than the numerically superior, economically prosperous Shudras?
True.
Right?
Yes.
So these questions do come up. Then the third question which will come up is that there is this narrative that the Dasa Dasyus were actually the indigenous people who were conquered and then they became enslaved. So then this whole narrative collapses. And all of these are interlinked. So to simplify this for our readers, we have created these six pillars, which you might have noticed in the book. These six pillars, the first pillar is to say that there were outsiders who came in. The second pillar is to say that they oppressed the people. Then the third pillar is to say that there was a discrimination layer. Then the fourth pillar says there is a denial of opportunities. Then the fifth pillar is a polemic attack on some of the our sacred scriptures. Then they added a new one called environment. That's a relatively new addition into
Yes.
that. How our practices are so-called anti-environmental, right? So it's an evolving story, but these six pillars need to be challenged. And if we don't challenge, then that becomes the narrative of the Bharatiya civilization, which is actually a fake narrative.
Yes, which is
Then we
what all
must,
these historians did. Yeah, like the
yes,
Western authors, like A.L. Basham, and you quote them, Wendy Doniger and others. You quote them and you cite them in your book and showcase how they write without any factual basis. They use ambiguous phrases like "it would appear to be," "may have been," "it is obvious." So you make a very very important case that they do not give any evidence, factual, textual, or scriptural evidence, but just use this as their modus operandi. All these Western Indologists. So can you please talk about it a little bit more, because you give a lot of details about this in your book, and it was one of the very important factors for me. When I read it, that it was an aha moment for me. I said, yeah, this is true, because they just say it without actually providing evidence, which they expect us to provide, and they expect everybody else to provide evidence, but they themselves have not provided any evidence for what they're saying.
correct. Gee, the way some of these authors have gone about is that if I make a statement saying it may be, it appear to be, right, and then three sentences later, I take out that maybe part and then use code it to say, oh, then this happened, right? Then they make a next assumption based on that. So somehow after two or three pages, then this becomes almost like a fact, right?
We
Without
forget
any
what is
evidence.
said.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we hardly remember, right? So this
Yes.
is standard one technique which is being used. Let's take the example of Professor Wendy Doniger. Right? She, as per her, it is evident that the Shudras, and the word is very evident, right? It's called evident, right? Because if it is not evident, then it means I have a problem, right? It's obvious to everybody, right? Or it's not obvious to me, right? So problem is with me, right? So they actually put us on the back foot there straight away, right?
Yes.
They say that it's evident that Shudras were an afterthought, right?
Hmm.
Because the word Vaishya is derived from the word which has a dhatu of meaning all, right?
Hmm.
Now, the theory is that because the word is all, so
Hmm.
Shudras were an afterthought, so they got added into this caste system after the other three. Right? But the question which comes up is, if there is a word which represents all, how did it have two varnas called Brahmanas and Kshatriyas on the top?
Correct.
All means all, right? So how come it can allow in the top? And if it allowed two to be added in the top, why did not it allow the other one also to be added in the top, right? So these are questions which I think many viewers will come up with logical questions, but they never get an answer. Another example is Professor Louis Dumont's work, which is the Homo hierarchies. This is a very
Could
famous
you
book.
name him again, please, so that
Homo hierarchies.
and
Homo
it is by
hierarchies. So this
Dumont.
is by Professor Louis Dumont. right? And this is a very famous book. I think it is being taught in some universities as well, I am told, in India, right? So that's possibly the next work which has to be taken up, is to challenge, right? Why is it being taught, right? Or at
Yes,
least an alternate view has to be given there, right?
correct.
Because anyway, I think Professor Louis Dumo is no longer with us, so I don't want to take about the author per se, but I would rather make it as a critique of the book, right? So
Book.
anybody else can also defend it, because he's not along with us now to defend it, so it's not fair. But we'll argue about the book. The main theme of the book is that it talks about a pure impure model, right? And the theory says that as per them, the pure model gets associated with the Brahmin, and then there is a progressive scale, and then it comes out, the impurity starts increasing as down the scale. Now, that book has got, I think, a very few actual data or evidence based arguments. It is more of a theoretical discussion. At least that's what I gathered. In one of the very few places they talked about evidences, they talked about, they had this challenge of pollution, uh, which comes after their death in a family. To have a close relative in a family, if they die, what is the period of pollution? So, as per the book, the period of pollution is 10 days for Brahmanas, 12 days for Kshatriyas, I think 15 for Vaishyas, and 30 for Shudras, as per the book. Then the book itself says, see, this is going in the other way, right? Somebody who is considered more pure, right, in the purity scale, if it is Brahmanas, then they should have more pollution, they should have a longer period to come out of it, right? But it is ulta hai, right? So, how to address this issue?
No, you
Then
just said 10 days for Brahmanas and 34 for Shudras or 40 for
32
Shudras.
Shudra. So that's how the gradation was. And then they say it's more or less the direction. Sorry, I'm sorry.
But what is the logic then? Because it's more number of days for Shudras and less for Brahmanas, right?
Correct. So that is what the conundrum was, because for
Oh.
them, if somebody is pure and if
Huh.
they are associated with this impurity, it should take a longer time for them to come out of it.
Oh,
Correct.
oh.
That's
Oh, that,
that's how
yeah, it doesn't seem logical to me, but okay. Yeah.
yeah.
So
So
they
no,
say
no,
that. Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So as per the model, right? So I think I'll exactly read the quote if I can, right?
Okay.
So what they say is, by going by the nature of the system, that is the system which they have defined,
Huh.
they say that we would expect the contrary, for impurity is more powerful than purity, right? And that is the logic. And the higher the degree of purity to be regained,
Oh,
because somebody has to regain more,
correct.
right?
Correct.
If they are in the
Okay.
higher purity scale, then the more severe should be the effect of impurity. It's
Okay.
like, for example, if I'm wearing say a brown dress, and then I go in the rain, a mud splashes on it, it's relatively easier to take it out, right? But then if it is a pure white cloth, right,
Like what
then
you're
it
wearing
takes
now.
harder to,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
takes
Yes.
harder to take it out,
Got
something like that.
it. Got it.
If
Got
I
it.
may simplify it, right?
Yes.
So now
Thank you.
they got a challenge. Now their model is not going by the fact. So their answer is, either we have not managed to break into the spirit of the system. So they have got a model. The model is right, but only thing they have not broken into the spirit. There is a spirit, right, in the system, which I don't know what it is. Or else the Brahmins have made this into a privilege. They have transformed it into a privilege. So this is called blame the Brahmins, right? So when we can't explain certain things, though we can, easiest way is to say that, oh, the Brahmin they have done something, wo kuch galati kar diya, right? So it is a slightly different form of, I think, what they used to call it as Orientalism in Edward Said, right? When you can't describe something, oh, that is how the Oriental is, right?
Yes.
That's it. That's all. That answers all the questions. So
Everything.
that's how they go about it.
Lazy answers. Yes.
Yes. I'm sorry. Did I answer your question there?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. And I like the example because it clarifies to me, because it didn't seem logical to me. But when you explained it, I got it. But what happened after 1947, Mahalingam ji? Because after independence, why are we continuing with this artificial theory, of course, of AIT? And apart from that, the concept of caste system itself, it's part of the constitution. What about the intellectuals amongst us? Nobody refuted it. What is the history of this? Has there been no fight against it in the past 70 years?
I think a few things happened, G. I think what happened after the independence was that we in India chose a lot of modern Western frameworks. They did bring a lot of positives to a young nation to progress. At the same time, they also brought in some challenges. One of the challenges was to deal these frameworks. What they have done is they aggravated, right, in a way, the question of indigenous identity. So what it did was, that's how the myth of the caste system also became amplified there, because the Western frameworks, what they created was, they created a situation where traditional scholarship, the native Indian scholarship, traditional Sanskrit scholarship was not given the kind of kept isolated, I would say, not given the validity which it requires. Right? But what it did was the majority of the Indians also did not have access to Sanskritam and to their secret scriptures. So whatever was the English narrative, and I would say predominantly, I would use the word Western Indology, but it doesn't mean all Western Indologists. I have clarified that in the book. So for the
Yes.
viewers who may not have read the book, so I don't mean anything like Western Indology is not just Westerners. It doesn't refer to Westerners. It can
Correct.
be an
A lot
Indian
of
as well.
Indians also.
Yeah,
Yes.
and it can be also that it's not that all the Indologists, right? There is a
Yes.
particular, they peddle a particular fake narrative, so I chose to call them as Western Indology,
Yes.
right? So this Western Indology oriented research, that is how it took the mainstream over there. But what happened is there is also a issue which happened, that the metaphysics of karma and dharma, which underpins many of our sanatanical practices, it necessitates something like a vitalizing engagement with the democratic institutions. That did not seem to happen because I think the state itself became what is known as a secular state, and so that engagement did not happen where we constructively put forward what is the underpinnings of our dharma, right? So that did not happen as well. So that's where we are, and we need to recognize that if we do not challenge some of these fake narratives, then they not only become in India the narrative, but because now they become global, they become the global narrative about our dharma as well. So it is going to have an impact not just for Bharatiyas living here, even
Yes.
for the diaspora communities, because whatever is being done here will also be transmitted.
And we've seen that with so many cases in the West now coming up. You know, they use that caste, weaponize it, and file cases. And also the book Caste, which was written in the West. So they blame Brahmins, they blame the caste system, and they take it as a given. And so we do need, as Brhat says, a civilizational based public policy. So, and the constitution is not, it's secular, which is more Western, which is unfortunate. But in the book, Mahalingam ji, there are a lot of disclaimers. So for viewers who are wondering, there are ample disclaimers that say that you do not condone, you do not excuse any form of discrimination, and none of us in our right minds do. None of us, encourages discrimination. So you say that by saying that there's no caste system, you're not, condoning any form of discrimination. But what about the negative lived experiences of many people who say that, oh, my uncle suffered this, my aunt, this happened to her. So it was a system which was not very conducive, they would say, they would argue, for some jatis, some communities. So is there an answer for that, or is there a separate book coming for that, or is there any something short, small that you could tell us right now to explain to us where you stand with this?
Jeep, thank you for that. As you rightly said, discrimination has no place in a civilized society, right?
Yes.
And often in the discussions with the younger generation, they do bring up this question about dharma being discriminatory. Then the easier references, but there are many references in the book. The easier way one can look at it is: does our dharma say that there is only one particular path to reach the Ishvara? No, it
No.
doesn't say that. There are many paths. And does it say only this is the exclusionary path? No.
No.
Does it even make a distinction between those who believe in this to non-believers?
We have no outsiders. No, we don't.
There are no outsiders. Does it say that because you are an insider or you are practicing dharma, there are special privileges? Actually,
Not
it has
at all.
only duties. Not at
On
all.
the
On the
contrary.
contrary, it has only duties. Right?
Yes.
So when the entire view of the dharma is this, how can discrimination even come into this system? When it does not even view that those who are not even believing in it, it doesn't even have anything negative or bad to say about them. How will it discriminate among its own? It doesn't make any logical sense, right? So I give that answer to it, right? And coming to that individual experiences, yes, during the research on this book itself, many Bharatiyas spoke to me, and they shared their personal experiences, lived experiences. They shared their anecdotes, and I respect that. And I think each of these experiences need to be respected, and the individual views have to be taken with recognition, and there is no not even a small space there where we can go and then try to validate or argue about it, because these are every person's individual lived
Yes.
experiences. They need to be taken as it is, respected. But all I can say is that the lived experiences were not in one, if I may use the word, in one uniform way. It was across the spectrum, so they were very diverse views
Yes.
and lived experiences, right? So the key point we were making in the book, and when I explained that, is the whole point is that it validates that there was no single central system of caste discrimination. There was no institutional mechanism to kind of come up with caste norms, to kind of validate, to kind of spread them, and to also punish people when they don't adhere to it. Right? Without such a system, right, then there is no system, right? So it's a practices across the huge geography, how it all got regulated. So these questions of thousands of years of oppression, you will hear that often, right? Thousands of years of
Yes.
oppression, but is there a factual evidence? Because even if we go by Dr. Ambedkar's research on this topic, he says the practice of untouchability itself started after 400 CE. Now, 400 CE, then the first invasion started in the 9th or 10th century, right? We can say the 10th century. We are talking about hardly 600 years. And how could such an institution have taken root and then spread it? And then during the period of invasion, somehow the Hindu social system lived in a vacuum,
Yes.
unaffected by it all, right? And then they were continuing their own practices, right? But where actually the reality is that millions were killed, right? We had a huge
Enslaved, sexual
yeah,
slavery.
it.
Yes.
And then they went through many discriminatory practices as well. But somehow the narrative is that, oh, Hindus were left alone, they were just minding their own business, they were very busy discriminating against each other, right? I don't think that happened, right? But where are we denying that discrimination did not happen at all in any place? No, that is
Yeah.
never there is never a way to generalize like that, and it will be incorrect. So we are clear in our position.
Thank you so much to clarify that. But in simple words, is the Western caste system that has been concretized by constitution, no less? What is it? How would you describe that when you say that? Okay, this is, you're saying it's a colonial construct, it is Western in construct. So, what is that which has been concretized by the constitution? What is the concept that exists in the Shastras that negates this? Because that is your argument. And what is the actual reality today with respect to, let us say, caste, for lack of better word?
It's, it's interesting because actually it may also slightly answer the previous question. There is an anecdote which happened, and maybe I'll start with that anecdote. It also connects to the previous question on discrimination and how we understand practices. Right? It's about Dr. Dharampalji, and he is in his late 30s. I think when this incident happened, he was traveling in a third class compartment, and with there was a lot of people. It was heavily crowded, and then he found a set of people, few men and women traveling together. He started talking to them. Then he asked them what is the objective of their travel. They say they are yatrikas. They went to Rameshwaram, and then they are now going to Kashi, and then like it's. And he saw a lot of pots and pans, and then they had earthen pots, and then a lot of rations with them. He asked them what is it all about. They said no, we do cook our own cooking, and then we eat our own food. So that's the reason we are carrying all of this together. Then in the conversation, he says, "Oh, maybe are you all from the same jati?" So
Sorry,
they
you're
say,
all
"No,
of the
we are
same
not."
jati.
Are you all from the same jati? That's his question,
Oh,
right?
huh.
So they say, "No, we are not from the same jati." Then he says, "How come? You are having the same bayans, utensils, you are traveling together. How is it possible?" They say, "No, in a yatra, there is no jati concept. So the concept of jati does not apply to yatras." Then he is like, and his own words, I am in my late 30s. How much have I understood about my own Bharat and my own civilization, right? And
Yes.
what are the lived experiences and the practices of different villages? But then we see this one huge general theory of caste system being
Yes.
applied across, right? So it doesn't really make sense. So coming to that, right? So that's a good anecdote of Dr. Dharampalji, and that made him actually go into that, and we got the treasures, right? Many of Dr. Dharampal works are the greatest treasures we can ever get.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, so coming back to your question, yes, the caste system is a product of Western imagination. That's it, right? There is nothing more to it, and there is nothing less to it. So it is not something which I think it has a sociologically, legally widely accepted definition, unique definition, or the proper, or its properties are well defined, or how it has been evolved, has it been articulated, how it has been enforced, what are the characteristics. In fact, I think in the book I have put out 12 questions about the caste system, and we would, as we go along, we would be publicizing that as well, that
So you're
asking those.
saying there is no legal, social, no definition that is accepted right now of the caste system,
Widely accepted, you can say
widely
uniformly
accepted.
available, right, which we
Okay.
can take it, right, a
Okay.
definition, because many people immediately talk about, okay, it's about hierarchy, it's about endogamy, so they
Yes.
start either describing the characteristics or the properties, but there is no such clear definition of what it is. And there is also a huge what should I say, right, claim that it is the most discriminatory system in the world, right? So if such, it is such a unique system which is so discriminatory, I would expect it to have a very well defined structure, your definition, properties,
Yes.
characteristic, how it evolved, how it was implemented, right? So none of this is actually available. So I want to put it out to the viewers as well, that as we go deeper into this, right, we do see more assumptions than actual reality being there,
Hmm.
right?
That is true.
Now, so what had happened is that the colonial view, right, of the caste system, it has distorted the entire frame of reference of our Bharatiya civilization, and that is how this caste system myth has evolved. Right? Now, and also got added was the views of egalitarianism, discrimination. So they were taken out of context and they were applied into our Bharatiya Sampradaya, where any differentiation is called out as discrimination. Right? So for them, it is one size fits all should be what is called equality, and that is not perhaps the right way to look at equality itself.
Difference is not discrimination, and diversity is not discrimination. Yes.
That's correct. That's correct.
Raji Malhotra ji, I think, says that. Yes.
Correct. And so a well-known example I think we can quote about is that without the underpinnings of our dharma, the karma and the dharma, so it's very difficult to have conversation. The famous conversation is always the varna is by birth, or varna is by occupation, or is varna is by choice. So this, and anybody who is on to this, right, they will all quote right, different scriptures, but unless one understand the karma metaphysics, and then they understand the causal physics of rebirth, right, these are essential ingredients before somebody starts talking about these topics. But without that, what happens is somebody can quote a scripture out of context here, somebody can quote another scripture, then it becomes actually a discussion which takes
No.
no end by
Yeah.
itself. So I think it's strongly recommended that many of these, they have to actually go and approach a dharmacharya and learn, right? Then they get a proper underpinning of the concepts of where we are from, and then it's more easy to relate to this concept. So that's why I see it.
Thank you, Ji. Thank you for that
Did I answer
clarification.
your question there?
Yes, yes, you did. Mainly, Western caste system is a construct. There's no proper definition. It has just been used and reused, and it's become a truth. And it's not really so. It's false, including the name caste, which is not the word itself, which is obviously all of us know by now that it's Portuguese. But the concept itself, you're saying, is a Western construct, and you give proof and cite in your book references that prove it so. Uh, and then you say that for our shastras and an understanding, we have to understand and appreciate the karma model, the metaphysics, and that we come from, and that can be learned from a dharmacharya. So thank you for that. And you also
And
say that travelers, yes, Ji.
sorry. So when it comes to our sacred scriptures, the evolution as well as the goals, both epistemologically and ontologically, right, of our systems are very behind what our worldviews are, Bharatiya worldviews are significantly different, or sometimes
Yes,
even they are in direct opposition to to the Western frameworks and views.
absolutely,
So unless
absolutely.
one understands the epistemological and ontological basis of this, right, it's very difficult to relate to that. Sorry, I
Could
just
you
wanted
please
to emphasize.
explain epistemology and ontology for viewers? Make
Yeah,
it
so
simplified.
I think this is in a very what should I say, in a very basic way, epistemology, maybe what we call as the theory of knowledges, right?
Knowledge.
How knowledge itself evolves, right? So and how we go about it, right? In terms of the Bharatiya civilization, the basis of an argument, right? What is the basis of an argument? What
Basis
is
of an
the
argument.
idea of argument? What is the basis of an argument? What is the idea of knowledge? What are the notions of fact, truth? All of these have very different connotations in our dharma.
Yes.
right? So when we take that body of knowledge, but without understanding those, but we go into using a Western framework to understand many of these things, then we are setting ourselves for what should I say, not a very productive outcome. Right? So that
Yes,
is what I
yes.
see.
And ontology would be, what is the source? Is it God, cosmology? Does it include all that? Or
Yes,
our
it
idea
does.
of
It
God
does.
and
You see,
Brahman, which is
our
very
idea
different
of
from a
yes,
Western God who's male and who sits in a particular place. And we say, but Brahman is everywhere and manifest in everything, right? So it's a very different concept of
it's a very
what
different
we
concept.
think of as truth and ultimate reality. Coming to travelers and historicity, that you've also mentioned in your book, and you say that uh, when they have come from other countries to come to India to either study or trade, they do not record any such rigid caste system or slavery even. And slavery actually, on the contrary, exists in the Western world. In the Islamic world, the Islamic invasions happened. There was a lot of slavery because a lot of Indians through the Hindu Kush were taken to the Middle East, mainly women and children. So there is a proof of slavery, and there's indentured laborers who went from India all over the world after slavery was abolished, and that is also a form of slavery. And we have a lot of Hindus now today in diaspora countries. And so you said there was no such system recorded by travelers, either caste system or slavery, or a group called untouchables. Can you give examples of one or two travelers who talked about it so people can and follow that and know that it is a fact that has been recorded in history, that we did not have any such rigid caste system or slavery or
Yes.
untouchables?
Megasthenes is one traveler. Megasthenes I have quoted in the book as well. And
Okay.
what he says is, I think in the Arayan book, I think he says that in India all Indians are free, and not one of them is slave. Right. So
All
when
Indians are free and not one of them is a slave.
not one of them is slave, all Indians are free. Right. So that is the claim. Right. So then when and he also compares that to the Lacedemonians or whatever, right? He calls it, and Indians are so far in agreement, right? And then he says that even they hold helots or somebody, they call them as slaves, but the Indians do not, right? And in fact, he goes on to say Indians do not even use aliens as slaves. He goes
Wow.
as much to say that they don't even use
As in
aliens
non
as
Indians, they don't even use non
non-Indians. Yeah,
Indians.
they non even non-Indians are treated as slaves, so much less a countryman of their own. He himself, I think that's the quote actually in the book, much less a countryman of their own. So now, what happens when the Western Indologists look at it? Dr. A.L. Basham, Professor A.L. Basham, he says, "Oh, Megasthenes declared that there were no slaves in India, but I think he was actually wrong, right? Because he did not understand that this Indian form of slavery is milder,
Oh,
right? So it is
milder.
not different. So he did not recognize, right?
Huh.
So obviously they know more than Megasthenes is, so
Like
they
everyone.
actually come up. And it's a concerted effort. A very more historians have actually tried to kind of argue that what Megasthenes wrote was wrong, right? One of the Indologists I would have quoted saying that Megasthenes came up with, I think, 6 or 7 divisions. I don't remember. And then, oh, you know what? I think he went back, and after a period of time, he actually wrote this, so he might have made an error out of that.
Forgotten. You mean six divisions in the caste system or in the hierarchy of society, or
Correct.
yeah, yeah.
and
So he
and
said
but he
six,
named
but
them.
we have forgotten. Okay.
Yeah, but the question is, right, okay, I might have got the number 6 or 7 because the whole idea is it doesn't fit into the four, right? Their
Yes.
problem is it doesn't fit into the four, right? So the Varna theory that people are organized along Varna collapses, right? So they have to argue that no, this number is wrong. But question which comes up is, okay, I may not remember 6 or 7 as the number, right? Somebody gave me the number, but how did
So what's
I
the number?
write
Yeah.
down all the divisions? He gave the qualification, the division, the
Correct.
classifications were given there, right? So how did he remember that? Right. So we attribute it to his incorrect understanding. He been incorrect, he didn't remember
Memory power.
correctly. Memory problem, confusion ho gaya kuch, right? So every all theories were used to kind of say that, oh no, there were slaves. And what is the proof of slave? Dasas and dasyus
It's the
are
word and the name and the
so
phrase.
that
Yeah.
those words are used to create. So my point is, there is something in the legal word we use it called onus probandi, which is the person who is making the claim has the burden of proving it. Right? So those historians who claim there were slavery should not just take the word dasa dasya and then say, oh, that means slaves, so that means slaves are existing. Because Arthashastra actually says explicitly that Shudras were not included. Right? They were included as Aryas, right? And no Arya can be a slave.
Yes.
So, so Shudras were not in the slavery system. So who else was in the slavery system? and why, right? So these were not answered, and hence that's how the fake narratives are, because they had to attribute slavery, which never existed in Bharat, to Bharatiya civilization, because everybody knows what happened in the 1800, 1900, the slave trade, infamous slave trade,
Yes.
all that, all what happened there. But they have to attribute something to Bharatiya civilization, so they came up with all this
Something
discrediting
negative.
of.
Yes. Yes. And then that is where we come to that in your book, you say that to distract Indians from the actual problems of colonization, famines, deaths, and famines were, created by the British, the deaths, atrocities, and even during the Islamic invasions, a lot of money went to the Middle East where the caliphates were. So, and then there was a lot of slavery. So these atrocities were committed on us, Hindus, at that time, both by Islamic invasions and the British Christian colonization. And theories such as caste system, etc. It was necessary to be created and propagated, and by elaborate means, to put forth so that we forget about the actual issues of colonization. So there were a lot of caste surveys, Mahalingamji, from the 19th century onwards. Now, they you also say that these were created so that this particular idea that we should forget about the atrocities, they created the caste system and the caste surveys. So is it not too far fetched that they would use so many resources, because caste surveys need so much resource, so much money and time? Is it not far fetched that they would do this to make Indians forget about the atrocities being committed on them by the colonialists? Is it something that you have evidence for, or you prove it, or is it just an argument you're making, or uh, it is something psychological? Could you please explain that?
Sure. I think I'll. It's a maybe is it okay if I take a slightly detailed answer into that?
Please, please, yes, so we'll
Thank you.
understand better. Thank you.
Thank you. So the first point is, for more than 1,000 years, we now had a period of invasions. Before the invasions, Bharat was an economic powerhouse. It had so much of prosperity. Okay? And by the time the invasions ended, we became one of the poor nations. Right?
Yes.
And there are so many indicators. I have given it in the book about how the mortality rate came down, and $45 trillion is one researcher claiming that was what was taken just during the colonial period of invasions. And the amount of inequality which was there, right, in one of the emperors, I think, period, the top 35% of the 25% or 35% of the revenue was taken by just the first 25 people
During
in the
Akbar's reign, and he's supposed to be benevolent. Yes,
correct.
yes.
And this is benevolence, right? So just imagine 35% of the country's produce economy is being just given allocated to 25 people.
25 people only. Yeah.
Yes, that's it. Right? So I may have reversed it in saying 25 or 35, but
But
that's
yeah.
how it was, right? So now all this happened, and then finally in the late 20th century, they also gave us a title called Third World.
Yes.
Right? So why did we suddenly become a third world after all our wealth is taken out? Right now, the question which comes up with this is the history, right? These are factual. People can say whether it was 45 trillion or 25 trillion, or that can be debated. Or one can say, oh, not 25 people took the money, maybe 30 people, or maybe it's not 30%,
The fact
35%.
remains the same. Yeah.
So these things scholars can debate, because these are scholarly estimates, right? So I'm not making these numbers myself.
Correct.
But the point remains is, when all this was happening, what happened to Hindu society? Was Hindu society completely unaffected by it? Because the entire narrative, if you see, of Hinduism is what I call as the colonial narrative, which was essentially cast in concrete with James Mill.
Yes,
Right?
that's
After
it.
James Mill's time, that these are barbarians, these are primitive people, and
Savage.
they had no idea of a civilization, right? And they need to be civilized. Right? So
Mm.
that it never moved away from that, and it was always that Hindus were frozen in timeless dimension. And it comes from him, because he never visited India. He said, no, no, I can just read about India, and then no, that is
Right.
what he reads about India today. He can represent a civilization which existed thousands of years back, because we were frozen in time. We everybody who was born a Hindu was exactly following what his ancestors were doing, no deviation, nothing. It was like almost maybe the the maybe the first ever concept of cloning an entire civilization, right? So generation after generation, we just lived in a vacuum.
They did not deviate and they just went,
It's a
straight.
timeless domain. That's how the writings are, right? It never talks about any impact, right? For example, I think it was Sir William Bentinck. I think he talked about the impact of colonial policies, right, on the cotton and weaving industry. He says the bones of the cotton weavers are bleaching the soil of India, the plains of India. That's his words. That was the impact of the colonial policies which are happening just for one segment of the society. Now, if the British themselves said occupational based caste system, so what happened to those castes, the cotton and weaving industry? Going by their own theory, right? I have a different view on the occupational part of it. I think I've explained it in the book. But if their own logic, those castes, what happened to them? Did they have an impact? What impact it had? Was there a study made by them? No. Right. So this way of isolating the Hindu society into one domain and then taking it away from all the impact of invasions was is how it was written. And after 1857, I think that's when they realized that for them to the the rebellion at that time, the first freedom of war we can call it, they realized that for their rule to be here, they need to have Indians divided. So the way they were divided
They
was
want to
on
divide India to rule well. Yeah.
divide Indians, right? So the first division was on the religious lines, right?
Yes.
Then on the identity lines. So you will see a lot of these identities coming up, right? Regional identities. Then they also had the caste division. So they found out that. And I think I have quoted some of the historians themselves saying that, right, the British found out that caste is one way for dividing the society and keeping them, preventing them from getting united. Because if they
Yes.
unite, then the colonial rule can be challenged. Right? So
Yes.
that's how the whole issue came back. And it's not our argument that the colonials adopted a master plan and came. Right? So they were learning. Right? So they had a framework which I explained earlier, right, about all this barbarism and others. But apart from that, when they say 1857, okay, now we need to divide people on further lines. So they started making up all these things as it go along. Then the Aryan invasion theory came. They said, oh, we are oppressors, but we invaded, but you were invaded by multiple civilizations. अभी क्या difference है? There is no difference. Right? So
Yes.
that's
Yes.
how it
Make it
is.
easy. Yes. For them.
Correct. And the famous saying is when we talk about discrimination, we talk about egalitarianism. And this is from, I think, Governor General of India at that time, I think Marquis of Hastings, right? And he says, the Marquis of Hastings says, a Hindu appears to be limited in his functions, mere animal functions. And even in them, he is indifferent in them. Okay, so this is about Hindus. Their proficiency and skill are to several line of occupation to which they are limited. It is little more than what the dexterity which any animal with similar conformation, like that of a elephant, a dog, or a monkey, might be supposedly capable of attaining.
How disgusting.
How racist! An entire
How
civilization.
racist. Yes. And like, my goodness. And this is Warren Hastings or Marquis
No,
is of
it's
Hastings is
Marquis
different.
of Hastings. They call it
Marquis.
Marquis of Hastings. He was a Governor General, right,
Governor.
before.
Okay.
It's not the Sir Warren Hastings.
Not okay. Wow. Yeah, that I haven't ever heard, and it's horrible. But what about the Risley's caste survey in 1901, Mahalingamji? You say that at that time, of course, people did not give one caste when they were asked what their caste was, and that is a common knowledge now that nobody associated themselves with just one jati. They gave different jatis. And then at that time, when the caste survey was done, and it was quite a strict one in 1901 by Risley, Lord Risley, many wanted to be placed on the higher
Correct.
ladder of the caste ladder, which again, and so the higher and lower terms or BC, OBC, ST, SC, not maybe OBC, but others are all terms by the British. So just to make it clear to the viewers, and we have adopted it, in the Constitution. So then they wanted to be placed higher. But now you see today, more and more groups are jatis are forming, saying we want to be placed in the lower rung, and we know why, for the benefits. Can you speak on this a little bit? Just elaborate it a bit.
Yeah. So there is this saying called trial and error, right? So trial and I would say the census attempts of the British were what I call as keep trying and keep making more errors. Right? So it is never an improvement over the period, but they thought they were right. To be fair to them, they were trying. So first is they started with the census of 18, I think 65. Then there was
1865
this
census.
1865. Then there was a census in 1872, and then there was
70.
one in 1881. Right, and all these things were based on the Varna theory, because they said, okay, they got hold of some books and then said, oh, the Hindu society is supposed to be this way: Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. So when they tried actually implementing it, they found that most of the Indians could not even relate to what they were talking about, right? And I think one good thing about it is, yeah, I think one good thing about it is that colonials have documented many of these things. So we
Okay.
actually have their own documentation to describe all this, right? So then they said, okay, they cannot explain any relationship between this caste and then the varnas. Right? Usko chhod diyenge, right? Then they said, let abandoned it. Then came 1891. They said we have occupational categories. Okay, let's go by occupational categories. Then I think there was a quote. I think I quoted. I think from Ibbotson. I think Ibbotson was one of the chief commissioner, right? So I think there was one communication where they talk about it. Firstly, they say that is caste a social or a religious one? Because people seem to be even changing religion, but then it is not affecting their caste. ये क्या है, right? So it doesn't have any effect on it, right? So it seems to be something different. Now, you say the Brahmanas are the ones who were looked upon, right, as the higher end of the scale. So they had a scale, right? But there were Shudras who were communities which were looking at certain Brahmana communities as outcasts. So
Yes.
some Shudra communities were viewing some Brahmana communities as outcasts. So this is recorded in the colonial writing itself.
They
Then
won't
what we
eat with them, they won't marry with them, and they look down on them. They don't want to see them. Yes.
Yeah, I don't know whether they look down, but I think it will come to that, right? Maybe it's a, I would say, with due respect, I would say that maybe it's a different achara. They don't
Ah,
mean to discriminate, right? It is
not
just a
look
different
down, that's the
achara.
wrong phrase. Yes,
It's a,
yes.
it's a different achara. And
Yes.
he also says that nothing could be more variable than to assume that a generation came in a particular jati, right? Their ancestors belong to a particular jati. It has nothing to do with this generation becoming a particular jati, because it can be changed by, I think the word they used is innumerable factors.
Hmm.
So many factors may be there, right? That they may not even follow that particular jati or take up that particular so-called hereditary occupation. So it was not there. Then came Risley. Then Risley's 1901 famously he said, I think the nose, the
Nasal
width
increase.
of the nose and divided by the width of the nose divided by the nasal height and multiplied
Yes.
by 100. He came up with that, and then he said in disproportionate to that is how the different social ranking is supposed to be. So they came up with all this experimentation, but then their narrative never changed. That there is this privileged community, and then and how they came up was, I think maybe I think will be very interesting for our viewers to say that. I think it was in the 1901 census. They came up with some very unique list of things to describe the scale, right? The higher and the lower scale. So the length of the period of pollution for births and deaths. I think we spoke about it earlier, right? So they used that occupation. Then all this by allowing or not allowing infant marriages and widow remarriages. So these were all considered as markers of social status. And they came up with this list, and then they said, in nahi chalta hai, right? They were not able to use it in the field. So then they came up with a list which was only, I think, three. And the three where I will read it out is whether Brahmanas act as Prohitas for their ceremonies.
Are
This
they
is one
purohitas or not? Yeah.
as not or not, right? Whether carries pollution either by touch or without touch, right? Pollution. Third is in the case of, they call it lowest caste, which I don't agree with. There is no such thing like a lowest caste. Everybody is equal. They said the lowest caste whether it allows or not eating of beef. These are the
Eating
three
of
criteria. Eating of beef,
eating of beef.
beef, beef.
So
So
one
these are
is whether they're purohitas, brahmanas are purohitas, or who is a purohita, I suppose.
for the
And
religious ceremony. Yeah,
yeah,
that's correct.
religious ceremonies. For the religious ceremonies, who is the purohita? Eating of beef, is it allowed or not? And the third one is the pollution, touch
Carries
and without
pollution by either with or without touch. So these
without
are the
touch.
three criteria, right? Now, with that, they somehow came up with this understanding. They put Brahmanas as the privileged community, right? But the point is, the 1864 census in Bombay. They did a census in Bombay. One third of the Brahmanas were described as paupers and beggars. It is British record. So a community in which one third of the people identify themselves as paupers and beggars, how can they be privileged? How can they be enforcing all these norms? So they self contradict themselves in these syntheses. So these syntheses were just a way for them to, I think the way they came up is to understand the population not for doing benefit to them, but for understanding how to control them better. Because
Yes.
if they don't know something, they don't know how to control it. Right. So for them, we were like more like people to be controlled, a civilization to be controlled. So they want to know more about what's their different practices and how they can create different fault lines. I think to me that was their objective, and I don't see any what should I say, good intention behind what they did.
Absolutely, because nasal index, etc., came from the race theory, from the
Yes.
German, I guess, Indologists and others, and they did that to, I think, Africans also, and Africans were put in cages, and so it's a very horrific history when we go into this race theory and when you study this. But coming to India itself, now the British terms, lower caste, higher caste, upper, lower, scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, backward caste, I mean, disgusting terms. Why do we continue to use these derogatory and discriminatory language even after independence? And our Shastras, what words do they use? And how do they describe a Varna or a Jati or a Kula?
I think you summarized it very well, Ji. These words should not be used at all. All right?
Yes.
There is no such thing like a privileged caste. There is no such thing like a upper, lower. There is no such thing like a Varna hierarchy. All these terms are actually wrongly used to describe our civilization. And I think, as we spoke earlier, I think the understanding of the belief systems, right, and having a fundamental belief in the metaphysics of karma, I think, and the causal physics of rebirth, because these are the underpinnings of our dharma, right? So that needs to be understood before people get into this discussion about what is a varna, what is a jati and a kulam. And some of them, they also have to understand that some of these terms, when they are used in the dharma shastras, they go into a different meaning altogether. So I think so they just have to be aware that how these words are used in a particular context. So I think I would recommend that. Anybody who is interested to know more about them, they should be approaching their dharmacharya for guidance, right?
To
And
get
that's
the
how.
context of each
Yeah,
word,
got it.
because it changes with context, the root and
Absolutely,
the meaning and everything. Okay.
absolutely, and that's how we Indians learned, right? That is how we Indians learned traditionally, right? We for us the knowledge is how we get it imbibed from our acharyas.
Hmm. Yes, our sampradaya, our pantha, and like you rightly said, and I had used the wrong word looking now. Every system, every path has its own achara, vyavahara, and they just
Yes,
did what they did. So it was diverse, and it was not a matter of looking up or down. It was just that people were adhering to their path. That is all it is. It was a diverse. It is still a diverse nation. What does
absolutely.
Dr. Ambedkar have to say about the caste system, Ji?
I think we'll take one aspect of it, which is what we call as the untouchability practices, right? Again, what Dr. Ambedkar talks about is that he identifies the struggle between Buddhism and Brahminism. He views it as a beef eating and as these key reasons for this emergence of untouchability, right? And I think I said before, he estimates that it came in 400 CE, right? Around
Current
400.
era, you mean? Current
The
era.
untouchability, right? That is how he says this practice might have evolved. But Dr. Ambedkar also pointed out that while Brahmins were supposed to have kind of avoided certain communities, right, mixing with them or interdining with them, we call it commensality and others, right? That's what the Western authors were writing, the British. But he says that this was one-sided. There were communities which were also avoiding all these interactions with the brahmanas.
So you're saying
And
brahmanas, when they avoided maybe eating together with somebody or intermarrying with some, let's say, jati, there were some jatis also who did the same. They did not marry into Brahmins or they did not eat with the Brahmins. It is from their side also. It is not a
correct. In
one
fact,
way street.
correct. In fact, he talks about certain communities where they thought Brahmanas were impure. They forbade them from walking in their, passing through their streets. And if a Brahmana actually dares to walk in there, he may be thrashed.
So let me repeat that. There are certain communities, or they were at least, who forbade in wherever they live because each community lived in a certain area in a village and they had their own area, like Brahmins had Agrahara, other communities had. So they forbade a Brahmin from walking in their street.
Correct.
He or she could not walk in the street, and if he or she did, they would be beaten up.
They'll be beaten up. That's correct. And there are reasons because they were viewed as impure, right?
They
and
were viewed
and
as
viewed
impure.
as impure. And
Impure.
why they were viewed as impure, right? Then
Huh.
I think Dr. Ambedkar actually spoke about it briefly. He says the totemic organizations of the untouchables and the brahmanas were different.
Okay.
Right. So if in a village, the Brahmin communities ritualistic totemic organization is in one direction, the so-called other communities, right? They had a different totemic organization, right? So that is where,
Totemic.
and he actually, I think he wanted students.
What do you mean totemic organization?
Totemic organizations is the symbol. Totems are the symbol, the religious
Symbol.
practices, the symbols, and what they consider as what is sacred, right? So
Okay.
these are the totemic symbols we call them.
Okay.
And he wanted students of anthropologists to study it even. Right? In fact, it was his words. Right? He wanted more study to be done on that, so to understand the true nature, because what British gave was only one side of the story. He was very clear on that. And uh, one of the people whom I have kind of acknowledged in the book, right, a great scholar by name Dr. Suhamohan Garu, he actually
Sudha
connected the
Mohanji. Sudha
Dr.
Mohan Garu.
Sudhamon, right?
Yeah.
Dr. Sudhamon Garu has actually done a research on, in his book, he talks about how the totemic organization may be referring to what we call as tantric practices, right?
Tantric practice.
Tantric practices. So
What is his book, Ji? What is the name of his book?
Dr. Sudhaman Garu's book is called Shivashakulam, and I believe he has come out with one
Shiva.
more book, Shivashakulam,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And he talks about that since the practice of Tantra is a different achara, right? It is achara beda which is creating these differences, right? So that leads to the mutual separation, right? It is actually mutual, like what Ambedkar ji talked about. It's like a mutual exclusion because that acharya interferes with that. It's like the way I explain it is in a layman term. If I need to explain, if somebody is taking so-called allopathic medicine, can they just go to Ayurveda as well as Siddha medicine and then take all of them together, right? They are not
No,
allowed,
it's not going to
right?
work.
So
Yeah.
it's not going to work, and it is not allowed, right? And I know from first-hand experience, because when I was taught Tantra Shastra, I was explicitly prohibited from using some of them. To not, because then I go to Vedamata and Gayatri Mantra side of the Vedika, I should not be using that.
Yes.
Right? So it is disallowed, and it took even a few months for my guru to actually get validation from Ma Kali to give me an initiation into that. Because just simply, it's not a discrimination. It is just that it's a different achara beda,
Not
right? And
clash. Yeah, yeah.
yes,
It should
it should not collect. And he was keeping my what should I say, my well-being in these
in,
consideration, that
yes, your
before
good
he started
interest.
initiating this.
Yes.
So that's how what happened was that the tantra was somehow looked upon in a negative way by the colonial rulers, and then they kind of attributed it to all wrong things, and then they kind of called it as a demonolatory, right? The demonolatory, and then they went about destroying all these temples. And I think that's what Dr. Sudhamohan Garu says. So-called Brahminism existed with all these practices for thousands of years without having any problem with them. But then the colonials went about in such a speed to demolish all this, and as per their own records, in South Travancore, one place, they were demolished close to 20,000 what they called as devil temples.
In South Travancore.
Travancore, one Samastana, right? As Travancore, South
So,
Travancore,
they
20,000.
demolished 20,000 temples, Tantrika
Ah, they,
temples.
yeah, they called it a devil temples.
Goodness. How,
Yeah.
how
So
horrifying.
So, in
Yes.
fact, I think that is how we have to change the narrative. That is why maybe I'll just say one extra sentence and stop here. Is the book Caste-icide has the picture of a Devi, a Murti, of Devi, and that Murti was actually destroyed, partially destroyed in South Travancore, and it was shipped to London. And actually, when I wrote a letter somewhere in, I think, February, to the Honorable External Affairs Ministry, they took the effort to actually go and trace it in the British Museum. It was not in the display, but it was somewhere else. They have actually located it, and now they are having talks, and hopefully we are able to get the Murti. It's called the Paramashakti, the Paramashakti, right? And that is the divine energy. Hopefully, with all these initiatives, we are able to get Paramashakti back into that, and that's how the book acknowledges that they were all part of the same Sanatana Dharma, right? So that's why the tree symbolizes the Sanatana Dharma, and the Murti of Paramashakti is still there, and we are waiting eagerly for her arrival. So
She
let's
has
hope
to
that
return.
she comes here.
Yes. Yes. We will pray, and I'm sure with your efforts and all our prayers, she will come back to where she belongs and she is reinstated again in her rightful temple. Thank you so much for all the work you do in various ways, Mahalingam ji. Another question, oh, before I move forward, I had a question on when you said Ambedkar ji says this, Dr. Ambedkar says this about the caste system. Are you referring to his book Annihilation of Caste, or is another book?
I think I refer to a variety of book. I think Who Were the Shudras I might have referred to in
Over
some
the
places.
shoulders?
Annihilation of Caste is one, and then
Okay.
he went and I think spoke in if I'm not wrong, Columbia University. He gave a very good lecture about how his definition of caste system was, right, and then he went through various scholars' work, which I've extensively quoted on how the caste system was supposed to be characterized. So I think a variety of sources of Dr. Ambedkar, and he's written so much. Right.
Okay.
So it's a huge volume of works of him, and I think it is the Ministry of Social Justice has put. I think they all of them are available on the
Online.
internet
Okay.
on the
Thank you.
internet now.
Okay. Coming to the word Dalit ji, does it appear in the Shastra or in the Constitution? And if not, where has it sprung from and why is it in vogue?
Uh, the way the word Dalit is first of all, it is not in the Shastras definitely, and it is
It's
not
not in
in
the
the
Shastra
Constitution. It is
and
not
not in
in
the
the
Constitution.
Constitution either, right? Constitution refers to scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. That is the only
SC,
reference
ST,
it
that's the only
makes,
definition. Yeah.
right? And the reference I trace it back into is around I think somewhere around 1927, 26. I think Mahatma Gandhi was writing an article in I think the Navjivan. He refers to this word Dalit and he attributes it to Swami Shraddhananda ji. So that's one of the earliest writings, at least I could locate on this term. But I think the Ministry of Social Justice, I saw something, I think in around 2018, a few years back, discouraging the use of such words. They say that we should not use those words, and then as per them, they recommend that better to use the constitutional terms like scheduled caste and scheduled tribes to refer to certain communities.
Okay.
So that is the latest I know of.
Okay. Thank you, Ji. Finally, could you please? I have two, three more questions, but could you talk about Professor Hokart? Do you say how do you say it? Hosart, Hokart. When
Okay,
I read
Mr.
the book Hokart, he made a very interesting premise of and his thesis of a ritualized society. How
Correct.
every caste or jati fits into such an idea. Could you please elaborate on that a little bit? Because I found it very fascinating.
Yes. Professor Hokart, I think to his credit, is one person who did not assume that there existed a unique caste system in India. In fact, if I refer to his words, he will use the word I think called, he says, contrary to what the common perception is, the caste system is not very unique to India. It is actually a species of a widespread genus. That's what he calls it, right? So it is there. Such systems are there everywhere, right? Now that he says, I know it is not an isolated phenomena. You cannot study it in isolation. So that's what many of the authors did, right? They thought it is unique. This is this. Then they went about studying it, but he went on compared it with other civilizations. Like he went into social systems of I think Sri Lanka, Persia. He went into Rome, and he compared some of these social structures. I think he did a few more as well. And he what he says is that the ancient civilizations had something. They were viewing the birth birth of a human and is how is living his or her living is, right, meaning when they say living, it's about a disease free, a full life, right? They were focused on that. And then the death, what happens after death, right? And how does death come about, right? And this is the three things they were very focused on, right? And he calls that a ritual, right? So most of them, their practices were organized around an understanding of it and how they can influence it. I wouldn't use the word control. I think they would trying to influence it for getting a better outcome for themselves, right? That whatever their needs need to be satisfied and other. So that's how the various societies can be viewed as, right? This is called the ritual organization.
Ritual
And since
organization.
yeah, since the ritual organization, it precedes the social organization, it precedes the political organization. So unless this ritual organization is understood, the political or the social organization cannot be understood. And he gives an example of I think a potter. Right? A potter does not view himself as just I'm making pots. He says the Kulalan, right? He is the son of Brahma, right? And he's creating these pots, right? So he's a creator by himself. So in that he is a priestly function. Right? Same way, a Westerner may think that a drummer is just a mere drummer, right? He just bangs a drum. That's the job definition, but that's not. He's actually a priestly function he performs. Right? So he explains all that, and this to me, I think when I when I read, I think. Lafcadio Heron, who writes extensively about Japan, who wrote extensively about Japan, Lafcadio Heron talks about how the Shintos operate, right? The Shinto customs. If a Shinto carpenter, when he builds the house, at a certain point, he dons the robes of a priest. He invokes, he does a few ritual chantings. He invokes the gods for the house to be blessed. And a Shinto swordsman, when he makes a sword, at a certain particular point in time, he retreats from his family. He puts the religious symbols on his door, and then he cooks and eats from a holy fire. And so it's the way they make it. But what happened was these ancient civilizations were never properly understood, and they were kind of I think what we call as a post-Renaissance view of the world, right? Because the world today is utilitarian, it is post-Renaissance, it is a particular worldview which is there. So all these practices were kind of not even discussed about, and there is a reason because today we talk about mass production, we talk about work being a task by itself. So the religious component of the work is taken away. We can't afford
Yes.
a sportsman taking all this time to make a sword, right? So the
There is
whole
no
focus
sanctity. There's no work as worship, and the idea that we have of it as duty or worship is not there. Yeah.
is not there anymore. And it's how can somebody make a sword today sitting and then making all these swords, right? They would rather make a small factory and then with a few instruments and then swords keep coming out, right? So it has been literally economical utilitarian lens is what is being used. And I'm not arguing that everybody should go back into that kind of
Yeah.
society, right? So that's not the claim, right? So we're not talking about all the limited point I'm making here is when you view ancient societies, right, we need to view it from a drishti that yes, there were people who viewed it from a religious perspective.
Yes.
They viewed it as a work from a sacrosanct was there
Yes.
into what they were doing. So let's not put our reductionist lens into that
Yes.
and then try to apply those concepts. So
Absolutely.
that's how I think Professor Okar's work is very critical in that it stands out to come from an unbiased view, I will call it.
Yes. Thank you, Ji. So your book itself, you are looking for Hindi translators for both the books, I suppose. And this book, Caste-icide, is now available on Amazon as an ebook for now. When is the print version coming out, Ji? In September, first or second week? Anything you want to
Hanji,
talk about the book? Okay. So
absolutely
and
correct.
okay.
Yes, sorry, go ahead, please. Sorry.
So is it first week? When are you looking? Is it fixed or you don't know when in September?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So we are trying to accelerate that because people who have read the ebook, some of them have come and said, so we would like to get a
Exactly.
print version of it, right?
Yes.
So I'm in talk with some publishers. So hopefully we would even have it much earlier than that because
Oh,
the ebook is already there. So it's a question of
yes.
just doing some process work around that, right?
Yes.
No
Yes.
great work involved there. So hopefully we may get it Ishwara Kripa, we may get it faster. Yes, the Hindi translators, yes, we are looking up because sometime what I am told, right? I'm not an expert here, and possibly some of the viewers may know it that they say that line to line translation does not do justice to a book, so they
No.
need somebody to bring in a context into that.
Yes.
So it's a specialized skill, they say. So if there anybody is available, then we are happy to work with them to release the Hindi version of the book as well.
Yeah, I hope somebody takes it up, and the viewers who are watching, please spread it among your circles. So this is definitely the last question, Mahalingam ji. Thank you
Yes.
for writing this very important book on the caste system. And how would you say caste system, because it is a colonial construct? How would you say it is different from Varna Jati Caste, which is a book by Rajiv Malhotra ji and Vidya Vishwanathan ji, or the work of Duncan Jalki and Sufia Pathan ji? Where are the synergies, commonalities, and where do you differ with them, if at all?
That's an interesting question, G. So I have quoted both these books as in
Yes.
the both these were their works in the book. So I think the Varna Jati system book, if I'm not wrong, it has a tagline that it's a primer for Indian social structures, and I think its objective was to talk about the history of the Indian social structures, and also for those persons who are desiring some working knowledge of it and being able to get into a conversation or to challenge some assumptions about it. Right? So I think that's now it was viewed. I think as for Dr. Duncan Jelki and Dr. Sufia Patanji's work, I have also quoted them in the context of I think the endogamy. I think their work was more about, I think it's the work I quoted was, I think, on the difficulty of refuting or confirming the
The
caste
Padakala Iyengar example.
arguments about the caste system, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's what they call it. Difficulty or refuting about the either confirming, refuting about the caste system. I think that's what the book was. And I think it's a paper, it's not a book actually. So in the research paper I quoted about the endogamy part. How is this book different from the other two books? I think it's a bit difficult for me to kind of state that, because in my view I think each book has a different objective, right? The author comes up with his own objective of what they want to communicate and how they want to reach their audience. So in a way I think that may not be fair to, they're on the same topic of caste system, yes, right, but they are looking at it into different ways. The way this book is positioned is that this book is positioned, objective is to, for parents and for youngsters to look at it if they have questions on self-hate, about caste system, privileges, discrimination, non-egalitarianism. So if they have doubts, they can refer into it, or they can use it also for having a challenge or a debate. And but when I say challenge or a debate, not an emotional one, or not something which is uh, okay, getting into an argumentative way, but just to put our points across. If they need references and others, so they can use that one. And as for the question, yes, there are some differences of opinion. I think in the book also I might have quoted, I think on the Varna Jati caste book, they talk about occupational categories, right? So on when in the context of Varna system, so I think the occupational specialization is what they call it. I do have slightly different view on that aspect. So yes, scholars tend to also agree a lot, but there are also some minor points where they may have a healthy differentiation. Is what I say.
Thank you, Ji. So, in closing, anything else that you'd like to tell our viewers, and how can they help you apart from translation or buying the book in this important journey that you have taken to lead us towards decolonizing our minds? Anything you want to add?
I think I think 2 points. The first is, I think I want to thank Brhat team and also to you for all the support which I am getting from your organizations. Like, we don't have a lot of reach or resources at our end, so dharmic organizations like Brhat are doing a wonderful job of helping us to reach many people over here. And I think the review you had made about the book recently, I think it's a very well thought out review, as I say, because sometimes I always say that it is easy to write a point of view, but for someone to take a view, objective view of it, and then take out the key points and then bring out the essence, I think it was very well done. Again, thank you so much for your career, and Ishwara's blessings to you for that.
Thank you.
Now, coming back to this, the caste system is influencing the policy making in India today, right? So that is a active reality which we start with this. And what happens, right? Because every individual or a family or a home must confront the caste system's fabricated narrative. Right? I think this is a choice we all don't have, right? We need to confront it in in a way, in a, what I say, within the constitutional meal and in an objective way. We need to recognize the significant harm caused by normalizing this caste system narrative as the factual narrative of the civilization.
Yes.
So we are not talking about executive policies which may come out of this caste system narrative, right? That's a different aspect altogether. But fundamentally, I'm misaligned with the notion that the caste system narrative of today is the narrative of our civilization. Right?
Yes.
That
It is
needs
not.
to be,
Yeah, it should not
yeah,
be.
it needs to be challenged, and it can be challenged with facts and in an objective discussion. Right? And how do we do that? Right? I think the way I see it is. Uh, Together we need to do this, all of us, including all the Brhat viewers here. We need your support, because the opponents may have a lot of money power, they may have a lot of resources, they may have a lot of media power, they may have a lot of reach, right? But what we have dharma and satya on our side, and we have viewers like you, right, who are listening to this conversation, right? Who What we need from you is the help which we request is, we don't need a lot of your time and effort, because I know it is premium, right? Today, in today's world, everybody is rushing. So what the help we request is to visit our websites once in a while, and then there are e-petitions which are available, and these e-petitions they can view, and it takes hardly a minute to sign them. But though it takes hardly a minute, it is a big help to the cause. And not just that, once you have signed the petition, please make sure your family members and your contacts are also aware of this, and that they are able to view it and then sign it. That helps, because instead of learning about it from other sources, they are learning about it from authentic source, which is you,
Yes.
right? And then they are much more inclined to view it and do it. So this small Kankarya, I mean, it's not small actually, because it is actually a big Kankarya, right? All of us are doing it together. So together, let's do this. Let's do our part of defending the dharma, as they say, dharmo rakshate rakshitaha. So let's. I think once we start the first step, Ishvara will take us to where we need to go to. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ji. And we will put the description of all the links, in the YouTube description, so people can access
Thanks.
it, and they can sign the petitions, and they can tell their family and friends, and also read the books and buy the books. Nandri Mahalingam Ji, thank you so much for all the work you do. Very grateful for your seva for Hindu Dharma, and we wish you a lot of success with your books and other public engagements that you take up left, right, and center. I'm sure it's very hard work, and all of us should support you. And I believe it was Paramasati who's going to come back, right? The cover is
Yeah,
Paramasati. Yes.
that's
So
correct.
we are waiting for her return to her rightful place in Travancore, and which is, I think, in the Tiruvananthapuram area. So.
Correct.
And maybe may a temple be built for her, and maybe again pray to her in the way it is supposed to be. So thank you so much. Namaste, Hari Om.
Thank you, Kavita ji. Thank you for all the work you do, and prayers to Ishvara for your and Brhat's team's all successes. Sarvam Krishna Arpanam. Ram Ramji.